The idea that you can listen to the whole thing, obviously, from top to bottom.
Good lyrical content.
Variety.
The musicality.
Records that are timeless.
Albums where the songs hang together very nicely, but they're all quite different.
Fear and pain.
Not, like, contrived.
Not trying to make hit singles out of each song.
The vocal, the way it lays in the track.
A certain kind of concentrated focus.
Sound, mixing, things that maybe you want to pick up an instrument.
There are albums that still sound very fresh today.
Something that I can put on and listen to the whole way through, and at the end of it feel that I've just, you know, I've been given something special.
Between Elvis's first gyration and Nirvana's last note, countless albums have made their way in and out of our record collections. As you'll see, a great album isn't limited to any one traditional genre. Our list includes jazz, hip-hop, and punk recordings, as well as numerous classic rock staples. But of all those LPs and discs, what is it that makes a good album great? Over the next 5 hours, we're going to explore just what it takes to achieve that distinction as we count down rock's 100 greatest albums. Now, picking the greatest albums was a daunting task, so VH1 asked for a little help. Here's a look at how the list was determined.
VH1 polled over 500 musicians and rock journalists, asking them to select the greatest albums of the last 50 years. Elvis Costello, Carole King, Britney Spears, Sly Stone, and many others cast their vote, but the results have been kept confidential. Until now.
We start off with one of the most famous entertainers in the world. Her provocative persona made her an icon, but her fourth album proved she took her music as seriously as her image.
Music is really divided into before Madonna and after Madonna.
1989's Like a Prayer brought Madonna more success, critical acclaim, and controversy than the pop singer had ever known before. The video for the album's title track featured an explosive mixture of eroticism, interracial romance, and religious imagery, creating an uproar that ran from the Vatican to Pepsi, who pulled the plug on Madonna's new commercial.
It dealt with a lot of taboos, and it made people afraid. And I think the people who reacted negatively to it were afraid of their own feelings. Come on, girls, you believe in love? 'Cause I got something to say about it. And it goes something like this.
Like a Prayer was Madonna's most personal album to date, addressing the death of her mother, the collapse of her marriage to Sean Penn, and her struggle for independence.
With Like a Prayer, I think, yeah, she did have something to say, and it's the opposite of what we're thinking.
I think she has an incredible belief in herself and what she does. And apart from anything else, she's great. She's just great.
Give me faith, give me joy, my boy, I will always cherish.
The B-52s arose out of the Athens, Georgia club scene, but they may as well have arrived from another planet when their self-titled debut hit record stores in 1979.
I think the songs in the first album are memorable because it was just totally unlike anything anybody had heard.
Rock Lobster, and it sounded just like totally fresh. It's one of the most fun records ever made, I'm sure of that.
Down, down.
I like their music very much. Very strong, energetic. I'm a fan.
Yeah, they were just out of place. Total whack, but somehow it worked.
Why don't you dance with me?
Towering beehive wigs and 60s dance moves got the group noticed, but the music proved they were no novelty act.
The only places we basically started out playing were parties, and you're playing a party down south, you better play some up-tempo dance music or you're out of there.
Thank you.
Though the Jackson 5 started out as a teeny bopper phenomenon, their 1970 release ABC proved the brothers were accomplished R&B performers. Immersed in the Motown hit machine, the group churned out irresistible pop that highlighted the undeniable vocal talents of 12-year-old Michael.
The Jackson 5 were a phenomenon. It was amazing to hear somebody 9, 10, 11 sing like Michael Jackson.
When I saw the Jackson 5, that was the first show that I ever went to. When they got up on that stage and they started singing, I was like, wow, I want to do that.
The ABC album that the Jackson 5 did was great. The voice stylings of little Michael Jackson. Sometimes I thought he was going to break his throat, but he would always, be able to go up there, and it was really great.
Their second album earned the Jackson 5 2 #1 hits and led to their own Saturday morning cartoon, variety show, and unbeatable legacy.
When Whitney Houston topped the charts with I Will Always Love You, many of her fans were surprised to learn that the song was written by country legend Dolly Parton. But Whitney wasn't the first R&B artist who looked to Nashville for inspiration.
Oh, you give your hand to me.
Ray Charles was already acknowledged as a genius of jazz and soul. But when he released Modern Sounds in Country and Western Music in 1962, he proved that he could make any style his own.
Ray Charles made country music understandable for people who live in New York City. He just put that blues edge onto it, and that's all we needed to be able to get into it.
With songs by Hank Williams, Don Gibson, and others, Charles introduced country music to an R&B and pop audience and scored his biggest hit to date.
So I'll just live my life in dreams of yesterday.
In country, he's one of the greatest country singers I ever heard. He knows how to get into whatever the style is. He's the epitome of soul.
Why don't you put your arms around me? I'll be your slave.
Modern Sounds in Country and Western is really pivotal because it really shows how a lot of deep soul music developed from country music.
Just a little loving will go a long way.
Liz Phair's 1993 debut album, Exile in Guyville, elevated the rock outsider to the queen of the indie scene. The independent album grabbed attention with its lo-fi sound and confessional songs, loosely conceived as a response to the Rolling Stones' Exile on Main Street.
It was like a template for me to answer to, showing how I concurred, writing my own version of that experience, or saying like, no, let me tell you what the real story was.
I like it. She brought a new face to that idea of writing songs from, a man's point of view.
Exile in Guyville was acclaimed as an underground classic, with Phair's deadpan voice and outspoken lyrics telling of love and sex from a contemporary female perspective.
I think certainly my attitude towards men on the album was shocking. I went fully into these different moods with abandon, and I was very revealing about myself. I didn't hold myself back.
It took an hour, maybe a day. But once I really listened, the noise just went away.
In the late 70s, the next artist was in debt, without a recording contract, and was reduced to playing small venues in Poland and Yugoslavia. But with the release of this album, she became an inspiration to anyone looking for a second chance.
When Tina Turner emerged with 1984's Private Dancer, she staged one of the biggest comebacks in rock and roll history.
You must understand, oh, the touch of your hand makes my pulse react.
I think Private Dancer for Tina Turner was one of those albums that kind of slapped everybody in the face and said, I'm back.
Oh, what's love got to do with it? Who needs a heart when a heart can be broken?
Stepping out from the shadow of ex-husband Ike Turner, Tina became a superstar and affirmed that there was hope for new beginnings, even in show business.
I want to make $1 million. I want to live out by the sea.
I wasn't thinking at all about my past. That was finished for me. I was thinking about me. I wanted to fill stadiums. I wanted to be a rock singer.
Tina Turner, I really respect her with her incredible talent and conviction, I think. You know, she kind of made herself into an incredible phenomenon.
In 1997, Britain's Radiohead released OK Computer, a concept album about the perils of technology that turned the alternative band into a mainstream rock sensation. The band mixed textured production and layered instrumentation with singer Tom York's moody, sardonic lyrics, distilling a wide range of influences into something uniquely modern.
It's a very concentrated work. It sounds like people who have worked in their own world for a long time. They made a beautiful thing, but you have to enter into that world.
It's basically a pop record, you know. It's not a difficult record, it's just got a different atmosphere to it.
Such a pretty house and such a pretty garden, no surprises.
With OK Computer, Radiohead displayed a sophisticated musicality only hinted at on their two previous efforts, and proved themselves one of the most unpredictable bands of the decade.
We had a really good time doing it. We were really into the stuff as we were doing it, and we were more positive and we were more like excited about what we were doing.
Usually the best stuff is stuff that you hear and you have to listen to over and over again to get more out of it. And that record is definitely one of those things.
In 1968, Simon and Garfunkel released their most ambitious album, a narrative on aging and friendship, Bookends.
We like to know a little bit about you for our lives. We like to help you learn to help yourself.
In the 1960s, Simon and Garfunkel was somewhat under the influence of the Beatles, as was the whole Western world. And we loved what they were doing to albums and what an album was becoming. It was a kind of an arty thing. You could say more intelligent lyrics. You could bring the engineer into the creative process and play with sound a lot.
Let us be lovers, we'll marry our fortunes together.
Tracking the life cycle from birth to old age, the songs on Bookends were seamlessly linked by Garfunkel's angelic voice and Simon's insightful songwriting.
Counting the cars on the New Jersey Turnpike, they've all come to look for America.
Bookends respects the aging process. Its lyric is more about maturity and then old age. And I thought that was an arty and interesting thing to do with an album.
Featuring the hit song Mrs. Robinson from the movie The Graduate, Bookends endures as a document of Simon and Garfunkel's artistic and musical maturity.
One person who wasn't crazy about the song Mrs. Robinson was Joe DiMaggio. He thought the line, "Where have you gone, Joe DiMaggio," was intended as an insult. Years later, when Paul Simon met him, he got to explain that, "Oh, no, Joe, that was meant out of admiration." When this album was released in the early 80s, it became a hit with critics and college students, but no one would have predicted that this band with unintelligible lyrics would go on to fill stadiums.
In 1983, REM emerged from Athens, Georgia with Murmur, the understated full-length debut that had a huge impact on America's alternative music scene.
When Murmur came out and sold, I guess, 125,000 copies, that was huge. I mean, that was much more than I think ourselves or IRS Records ever expected it to do.
We also got press like we'd sold 1.5 million. I mean, you know, Rolling Stone things, and we're on David Letterman.
Murmur's atmospheric mixture of Southern Americana, garage punk, and Michael Stipe's cryptic lyrics introduced the band's traditional yet contemporary signature sound.
Murmur by REM was sort of like boom onto the scene. I mean, they had done other stuff, but that was like all of a sudden people know who REM was, and that was obviously a big college scene thing. And when Radio Free Europe is such a defining song for them.
Though REM's subsequent albums would sell millions of copies, none of them would surpass Murmur's influence.
REM Murmur was, for my age group, probably the most profound record made.
In 1986, Peter Gabriel released his commercial breakthrough, So. With help from its inventive music videos, the album turned the art rock cult figure into one of the decade's biggest pop stars. After his days leading Genesis in the early 70s, Gabriel moved his music toward a more confessional, experimental sound. But with So, Gabriel and producer Danielle Lanois came up with an accessible combination of world beat, funk, and pop.
In this proud land we grew up strong. We were wanted all along. I was taught to fight, taught to win. I never thought I could fail.
Peter Gabriel's record sounds sculptured to me in a very good way. A lot of care went into that record. It took a long time to make, and I think that time shows up in the music.
The grooves are wonderful, and I hate the phrase world music, but you could say it starts somewhere around Peter.
Hi there.
The album that Peter did was one of those albums that actually set a mark in a point in time.
For years, the phrase rock opera was considered a contradiction in terms. That's until the band at number 90 released a concept album that told a story too complex for a 3-minute single.
An opening at the Metropolitan Opera is usually an occasion for an evening of Verdi, Puccini, or Wagner. Instead, you get The Who, a rock group, and now the authors and performers in a rock opera.
Rock's first full-length opera, 1969's Tommy, was a landmark for The Who, launching the Brit pop stars to international success.
It was one of the first albums that I bought. It was a double record, and it was a concept album. Now, this was a heavy thing.
Ever since I was a young boy, I played the silver ball.
The opera starred a deaf, dumb, and blind boy who excels at pinball, only to become an empty pop culture icon that fails his followers.
That deaf, dumb, and blind kid sure plays a mean pinball.
Songwriter Pete Townsend constructed the concept album with solid rock songs that built upon his narrative and ultimately opened up the realm of what pop music could do.
I was able to seize the opportunity, say, a role like Tommy in the way that it grew in The Who, you know, which is a song cycle, and make it more operatic, more dramatic.
I wanted no more to do with success. I wanted to be just accepted as a musician. And Derek and the Dominoes was what that was about.
After the breakup of Cream and Blind Faith, Eric Clapton formed Derek and the Dominoes in 1970. Layla and Other Assorted Love Songs was the band's only studio album. The double album was a guitar rock classic, featuring the skillful work of both Clapton and Duane Allman.
I need your love, baby. Please don't make me wait. Tell me it's not too late.
Derek and the Dominoes, the first time that I sort of got acquainted with the fact that there are live takes where the feel is more important than getting everything in tune. You know, I wasn't used to hearing Duane Allman play even the one note out of tune.
Very little was added or changed except for the real conscious overdubs like on Layla where you got 14 tracks of guitar doing weaving in and out.
On songs such as Layla and Bell Bottom Blues, Clapton expressed his romantic anguish as he struggled with his desire for George Harrison's wife, Pattie Boyd.
They're exploring all of these feelings and all these emotions that are things that we've all gone through, and they're exploring that while exploring blues music.
With their 1980 release, Remain in Light, the Talking Heads strayed from their punk origins to create quirky experimental funk with a brain.
We didn't have any proper songs written. So the idea was that we were going to go in kind of like jazz musicians would and improvise things. I think it was a pretty groundbreaking record.
Produced by Brian Eno, the album featured broader instrumentation that reflected the group's interest in dance grooves and African rhythms.
I think we were inspired by African music and had been for quite some time, and also American funk music.
To me, it has a completely different feeling. You get deeper grooves going with a larger group and keep it going for a longer time.
Remain in Light spawned one of MTV's first hit videos, Once in a Lifetime, and secured the Talking Heads' place as a revolutionary art band who transcended the boundaries of pop.
to Remain in the Light over and over. It was a funky record, but it was also really atmospheric and quite beautiful at times.
Same as it ever was. Same as it ever was. Time isn't holding up. Time isn't after us. Same as it ever was. The same as it ever was.
This British supergroup recorded the next album surrounded by constant rumors of a breakup, a prophecy that came true less than 1 year after its release.
With their second album, 1967's Disraeli Gears, British blues band Cream found their own voice.
Disraeli Gears. I love that. That's a period I would have picked to say that's the essence of the band.
Jack Bruce, Eric Clapton, and Ginger Baker created an album of experimental psychedelia, and in doing so, laid the foundation for blues rock.
And the colors of the sea find your eyes with trembling mermaids, and you touch the distant beaches with tales of brave Ulysses. With you, my love.
Just a melting pot of jazz, blues, classical music, and rock and roll and pop music. I mean, that's what the group was really all about.
In 1973, The Who explored their roots in England's mod culture with their second rock opera, the double album, Quadrophenia.
There's some amazing songs on Quadrophenia that have never gotten their due, like Love Rain on Me and Can You See the Real Me, and songs like that that are just as angst-ridden and edgy as Bob O'Reilly.
The album's plot depicted the 60s mod scene through the split personalities of its main character, Jimmy. Personalities that symbolize the four members of The Who.
It's a story about all the insecurities and all the angst that we live with through our adolescent years. That album was kicking studio record, and we blew several studios away. We were at our peak, but we were at our peak as a kind of a blood-letting machine. There's not much subtlety there.
During The Who's Quadrophenia tour, drummer Keith Moon partied a little too hard, and he passed out in the middle of a concert. A 19-year-old fan was plucked out of the audience to play the drums, and the show continued. Rock and roll!
Here's a look at the results of VH1.com's poll for rock's greatest album covers.
Next is one of rock's great survivors. In 1999, he teamed up with Matchbox 20's Rob Thomas on a song that stayed in the #1 spot for 12 weeks. But Rob wasn't even born when this album topped the charts in 1970.
With a revolutionary mix of salsa, jazz, blues, and rock, led by Carlos Santana's flowing lead guitar, Santana won universal acclaim with the release of Abraxas in 1970.
Got a black magic woman. Got a black magic woman.
Abraxas featured the songs that would become Santana classics, including a thorough reinvention of the Fleetwood Mac tune Black Magic Woman and a cover of Tito Puente's Oye Como Va.
We were playing blues, but when we heard the congas coming into the blues, we knew that we had something that the other bands didn't have, because, you know, usually with blues you kind of listen to, you know, but with congas you got to get up and sweat and participate.
Classic Santana. That's the period where Santana just really hit me over the head and said, this guy's great. It's so simple and the band is just wailing away.
Technically, he's a fantastic guitar player. You get a great feel from him. He's pouring out his heart and soul when he's playing.
Released amid a flurry of controversy in 1986, Paul Simon's Graceland was a mix of South African jive music, Latin rhythms, and the New Jersey natives' own eclectic pop sensibilities. Simon came under fire for recording in Johannesburg during a UN boycott against apartheid, but the album introduced the work of oppressed South African musicians to an international audience.
I'm going to Graceland, Memphis, Tennessee, and I'm going to Graceland.
I was unaware that the cultural boycott applied to going to South Africa to record with black South Africans. I thought that it was about performing there in front of segregated audiences. I don't believe that the cultural boycott was intended to stop the art of South Africa and the culture of South Africa to find acceptance in the rest of the world.
But I've reason to believe we all will be received in Graceland.
What a wild concept for somebody to take like an African choir and all those sounds that he incorporated and put it together with Paul Simon's songwriting.
One of my favorite songs on that particular record is Diamonds on the Soles of Her Shoes.
Diamonds on the soles of her shoes. People say she's crazy, she got diamonds on the soles of her shoes. Well, that's one way to lose these walking blues. Diamonds on the soles of your shoes. If you'll be my bodyguard, I can be your long-lost pal. I can call you Daddy, and Daddy, when you call me, you can call me out. Call me out.
Paul Simon was a prophet of his time musically. I think that there are just certain people that have this kind of vision.
Graceland breathed a second life into Paul Simon's career and went on to win a Grammy for Album of the Year. New York art band Television was an underground phenomenon of the 70s when they released their revolutionary rock album, Marquee Moon.
Marquee Moon is one of my favorite records. The title track from that, which is like 10 minutes long, is just a great song.
Hesitating. Critics found the 1977 debut hard to resist due to its eclectic punk sound, juxtaposed against guitarist Tom Verlaine and Richard Lloyd's psychedelic-inspired jams.
I love the arrangements. I like the way the songs were constructed. It's a very edgy record.
Though Television broke up within a year, the influence of Marquee Moon endured and paved the way for the melodic guitar sounds of the 80s post-punk movement.
That's a knockout, stellar, beautiful record. It's also very timeless. Yeah, Verlaine's a monster guitar player.
I see no
Full of fist-pumping anthems, racy double entendres, and a title that provoked rumors of devil worship, this 1980 ode to sex, drugs, and rock and roll turned this next band into heavy metal superstars.
In 1980, AC/DC frontman Bon Scott died of substance abuse, but the band rebounded with new singer Brian Johnson on Back in Black.
We just started working on songs to take our mind off it. Back in Black, the title, was dedicated for Bon Scott.
That song was so great. It introduced the world to Brian Johnson, you know, because after Bon died, I'm like, you know, forget it. AC/DC's done. But this guy came in there with pipes from hell.
With Brian Johnson's screeching vocals and Angus Young's power chord crunch, Back in Black became one of the most successful albums in hard rock history.
Back in Black was the greatest hard rock record ever. It's timeless. You can listen to the record the whole way through. Good songs, good sonic qualities, and just hard rocking.
I got Back in Black, and I was like, God, that's one of the greatest metal albums of all time.
By the mid-60s, Otis Redding was a rising star in the world of R&B. But with his third album, 1965's Otis Blue, his influence spread to the mainstream and he became known as one of the most powerful voices in popular music.
What you want, you got it. What you need, baby, you got it. All I'm asking, want a little respect when I come home.
The album included one of Redding's biggest hits, Respect, which was made even more famous by Aretha Franklin.
R-E-S-P-E-C-T, K-F-T-C-P. I love you, Otis. Always did.
I've always been an Otis Redding fan. I still am.
Anything that Otis Redding did was incredible. You wanted him to have whatever he was wanting, whatever he was crying for, whatever he longed for. You wanted him to have it. Please let him have it.
I've been loving you too long to stop now.
Otis Redding was a very unique talent because he was a visual person. You know, if you went to see Otis Redding, you were going to get a visual treat. And he just had that power about himself that made his music powerful.
I love you. I love you. I love you with all my heart.
Though Redding's life was cut short in a plane crash just 2 years after the release of Otis Blue, its resounding effect keeps his memory alive.
I love you, baby. I love you, honey. Good God Almighty. Good God Almighty. I love
That's all for the first hour of the 100 greatest albums of rock and roll. Now, before you go online to complain about the choices, remember there are still 80 albums ahead and your favorite could be the next. Until then, I'm Jeff Bridges. So long.